Today we're discussing a topic that everybody experiences, and that's grief. Grief is oftentimes associated with personal loss, but we also experience grief in the workplace. And as leaders, we are not equipped for how do we manage someone's grief. In fact, oftentimes we just send them off to an EAP counseling session, but grief doesn't stay in counseling. It doesn't stay at home. It shows up in the workplace. So today, we are going to equip leaders with what do you do when you have an employee who's grieving so that you can show up for that employee and help them during that difficult time. Hello, my name is Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims, and I am the host of 901 Let's Talk Workplace Psychology.
Thank you for tuning in for Workplace Psychology with Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims on Mondays at 6:30. The focus for this program is to understand workplace psychology theory, consider these key points, focuses on the behavior and mental processes of individuals in a work environment, aims to enhance employee well-being and productivity through psychological principles, examines factors like motivation, job satisfaction, and organizational culture, utilizes research methods to assess workplace dynamics and employee performance.
Live from Studio 67, this is 901 Let's Talk Work Psychology with Dr. Delos, where we explore the psychology of work, well-being, and everything in between. Hello, I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims, industrial organizational psychologist and CEO of Talentergy. And today we're going to be discussing a very important topic that everybody has experienced, and that's grief. Grief is often thought of as just a personal loss, but grief shows up in organizations all the time. It shows up during a loss of a colleague or a divorce or an illness or even through organizational changes. But leaders are not equipped for what do I do with an employee that's grieving. So instead they say, leave your personal troubles at home, but there is no leaving grief at home. You don't become a different person when you show up at work. So grief shows up in your meetings. It shows up in your productivity. It shows up in how decisions are made. And so today we have with us a guest that's going to talk to us about what do we do with grief as a workplace phenomenon, not just a personal one. Please help me and join me in welcoming to our show, Camelia Smith, CEO of Renewed Outlook.
Hello,
Camelia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm
Please
glad to
have
be
a
here.
seat. Camelia is a licensed social worker and grief counselor who works with individuals navigating loss, trauma, and transition. Through Renewed Outlook, she helps people process grief in healthy and sustainable ways. So today, Camelia, as we talk about grief in the workplace and how do we translate this from an organizational standpoint, I'm really interested, based on your background, what have you seen in regards to grief? We know grief from a personal standpoint, but how might it show up in the workplace?
It shows up in many ways. In the workplace, distraction, lack of focus, lack of productivity. So that's a lot of ways that it shows up. There's sensitivity from the person. They feel that they're not cared for and that their experience is not acknowledged, and so that can kind of derail their relationship with their leaders and higher ups.
Yeah, and that's so important. We were just talking about in our last show with our last guest the importance of relationships and showing up for your employees. Leaders are like, but I'm not a counselor, so I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing when an employee is grieving. Is there something that can help leaders be more prepared for what they should be doing when they have an employee who might be grieving? And again, it could be because of changes in the workplace. It could be because of a loss of a colleague.
Yeah, I think that presence is the biggest thing, just being there and acknowledgement. I just had a client who had a workplace loss, one of their colleagues, and the biggest thing that they kept repeating is that the workplace just went on, they just kind of continued. They didn't recognize it for the employees. They didn't do any of those things. So just having that space, that acknowledgement, that hey, I know it's going to take some time, then that is kind of the biggest thing that anyone can do.
Yeah, I love that example because my son actually experienced that. He worked at a hospital and they lost one of the nurses, and it was a friend, you know, and I think people forget that. Yes, you're at work, but because you work more than you're at home, a lot of times you become friends with the people that you work with. And they experienced that loss, and there was nothing. There wasn't a, do you need to talk? There wasn't a counselor. There wasn't anything said about it. It was almost like hush hush. And that's when my son said, you know what, I love working here, but if that's how they, you know, think we should be handling loss, maybe this isn't the right place. They started to wonder whether or not this really matched the mission of what we're doing in, you know, in the workplace. So tell us more, at Renewed Outlook, what sort of programs or things do you do for individuals as they're experiencing grief to help them through that process?
Well, I will say that a lot of times listening, you know, and just kind of being that safe place and not feeling like they're being judged about how they're experiencing is the biggest thing. And then I help them work through the process, walk through the process. I'm sure, have you heard of Kubler-Ross? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So she has the 5 stages of grief, and so that's kind of the most common thing that people experience. But in my observation and in my research, I've observed about 11 different things, and so I can help walk people through. It might be another segue that I develop, that I walk them through, and they're able to kind of get those emotions out, and then they're able to look at things a different way. And a lot of times when you go to work, you don't expect that the whole work hour is going to be about grief or walking you through it, but that acknowledgement and maybe taking a little time and a little space, it could be even 5 minutes or so or less, makes a huge difference.
It makes you feel seen. You know, and I think sometimes when we're grieving, that's what we need the most. We need to be seen. You know, you brought up Kubler-Ross, and I'm very familiar as a psychologist and you as a licensed clinical social worker, but we have people that are watching that may not be as familiar. So could you walk through just high level those 5 stages of grief so people can recognize what it might look like?
So a lot of times people experience the denial where they just don't believe it's happening. They don't put any stock into it, and it's just, you know, they're out of sorts. Then they may go into bargaining, where it might be, well, if I do this, or I shouldn't have did this, or maybe if this happens. In my practice, I noticed that in that stage, there's a lot of blame or guilt. So that kind of ties in with that bargaining. Well, it's your fault if you wouldn't have done this, or if I would have picked up the phone when they called. Those type of things are kind of heavy in their mind at that time. Then there's that despair or sadness, that kind of loss of hope, that, you know, that void may not be filled, that attachment that they had with that person may no longer be there. Then there's that anger stage, and that's probably the one that a lot of people become familiar with, because that is that part that when your co-workers or your colleagues or your leaders do not respond or acknowledge, that's what comes out, that anger. So it can be because that person has been lost, or just because you just don't like the way something is going. It's just a little bit more easily to get to you. And then finally, there is that acceptance, you know, where people kind of accept that there's been a loss, my life is changing, my life is going to be different, and that I have to do things different. Now, the funny thing about that is that there's no set time limit and there's no order. I went down a order, but it can pop up any kind of way.
Anytime. Well, we're going to continue this conversation when we come right back from break. As you can see, we have a wonderful discussion going on right now with Camelia Smith, CEO of Renewed Outlook. So we welcome you back right after these short messages.
It's not a toy he wants. Nice clothes, not on her list.
What these kids want, your kids have. Their health.
At St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, we're fighting for kids who aren't as lucky as yours.
The discovery that St. Jude can help save children close to you.
Our treatments are used in hospitals all across America.
Thanks to our research, St. Jude has the world's best survival rates for the toughest childhood cancers.
And no family ever pays St. Jude for anything.
Our discoveries today could save a child you know tomorrow. So if you have healthy children, give thanks.
Give thanks.
Da las gracias.
Give thanks.
Donate now or visit stjude.org/thanksgiving to learn how you can help St. Jude save children's lives.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to the Let's Talk 901 series on Mondays starting at 6:30 p.m. until 8 o'clock p.m. Kicking the series off at 6:30 is Let's Talk Workplace Psychology with Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims, where she interviews top leaders in the corporate industry regarding tools to use for excellence in the workplace. Next up at 7 o'clock is Let's Talk 901 with Betty LaMarr. Betty talks about all things 901, including top doctors, business leaders, and people just like you doing what you do to uplift the city of Memphis. 7:30 p.m., the Medical Class 901 with Dr. Chi, renowned infectious diseases specialist in the Mid-South who specializes in geographic medicine. Dr. Chi focuses on infectious diseases affecting the population. Be sure to tune in on Mondays starting at 6:30 p.m. back-to-back for Let's Talk Memphis on Xfinity Cable Channel 17 and simultaneously on 1091.
Now back to workplace psychology with Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Work Psychology with Dr. Delos. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims, and I'm here today with Camelia Smith, CEO of Renewed Outlook. Camelia, before the break, we were just talking about the 5 stages of grief, and you told us about the 5 stages, the last being acceptance. Is there anything else you'd like to add about that?
Yes, I would just like to say that when people are going through this process, that it can change. Like I said, it doesn't go in any order. But one big thing is that the duration may change. Like how long someone may, let's just say, was in despair and they was thinking and they had these long thoughts. One time it may have lasted for a whole week, and then it can kind of go throughout time, and so now it's 15 minutes that they go through that process. So those are some of the changes. Although you may still be experiencing some of the symptoms, the duration, how long it lasts, how intense it is, and how often it happens changes.
And you know, something you said really resonated with me. You talked about how it may be different for every person. I remember when I lost my dad, I took some time off before he passed because, of course, I wanted to spend time with him prior. And I had some leaders say, well, you know, when my dad was in the hospital, I brought my laptop. Like, they kept working. And I'm like, well, that's good for you, but that's not good for me. That's not what I want to do. But it made me feel guilty. You know, it made me feel guilty. So before I could even start the grieving process, because I did lose my dad 2 weeks later, that was in my head. What are some things that leaders can do to help prepare employees who may know in advance of a situation that may go through those grieving stages, so that, you know, they may be more supportive of employees that are going through grief?
Yeah. So there are those competing priorities, right? You want to be that good daughter, or you want to be there for that person that you may be anticipating losing, but then also you want to be a good employee and kind of follow through and kind of still do things. And a lot of times when we have flexibility, we think we can do both, but we can't, not fully. So leaders, you know, sometimes they're in that mindset of getting their productivity, and that's the only focus that they have. But if they're getting that kind of acknowledgement and kind of research on grief and kind of knowing how to deal with their clients, then it might be that they set different times. Well, do you think that you can do it in the morning, or is the afternoon better for you? Kind of having some type of arrangement so that a person doesn't feel that they have to make a choice between their job and being there for their loved ones.
I love that, the flexibility, because you're right. I mean, there were times when I absolutely could have worked because my dad was asleep or, you know, things were going on. He was in therapy, whatever, the physical therapy he had to do. But feeling like I wasn't supported really was, you know, mind-blowing for me. So in addition to having to deal with what I'm going through personally, now I've got to worry about how I'm being viewed at work. So I love what you said about, yes, there is a balance there, but you can offer some flexibility to that employee, meet them where they are, so that, again, you know, for me, work kept my mind off of it, but feeling like I had to work just added more stress. Whereas if I had a leader at the time that was more flexible with me, I probably would have appreciated that a lot more. So I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. You know, one of the things that we talk about too with grief is oftentimes we do think of personal loss, like I mentioned, the loss of my dad. But having been in corporate America, I can tell you that I've also seen layoffs and people lose their jobs. And right now we're hearing about that more and more. So when leaders are dealing with what I'll call collective grief, you know, you're not just dealing with a one-off, a personal loss, but really that collective grief. Maybe it's, you know, an employee or a friend who lost their job. What recommendations or what advice might you give to those leaders and how they might manage those situations?
Again, that acknowledgement and that presence, especially acknowledgement. Hey, I know that we just did this. I know that there's been a loss. Then I want to give you the opportunity to be able to express your feelings about that, or know that you have a safe place that you want to do that. Having, again, that separated time, that someone maybe comes in and talks about loss. I remember when I was in corporate America and there was a lot of changes going on, a lot of losses and things, they had someone to come in and did a kind of debriefing talk, telling us about what was to come, what we could expect. And so all of those things kind of helped kind of digest things, and kind of you knew that the person knew that things would come from it.
Yes, yes. So they took the opportunity to acknowledge it up front. You know, sometimes I hear leaders say, but Danielle, I'm not a counselor, and if I open the floodgates, I don't know that I can close them. So what would you say to those leaders, the leaders that are afraid to acknowledge or bring employees together and acknowledge that this is what's happening right now because they're afraid of opening those floodgates?
Well, you know, anytime that you're not an expert in something, you go and get an expert. So if you can't do it, oh, I can get them together, I can get them time, but I'm going to bring somebody else in. So having those relationships, having those networks with other people who are more comfortable and who know what to do can definitely be an opportunity to do stuff. Also knowing what those other resources are, because hey, you might be able to talk to somebody, but then you might need them to go and talk to somebody else. But it's a whole lot easier for that person to accept it when you can give them a referral. Hey, these people have worked with us before, we're familiar with them, go ahead, give them a call, these are some options, or you can try someone else. Yes. So just being equipped with other people. If it's not your lane, then you can just be equipped with other people, and just having those options can really help.
Yes, and I appreciate that. We're going to take another short break, Camelia. This is a great conversation. So I hate to stop, but we're going to take another short break, let our audience get some water, and come back. And when we come back, we're going to continue this very important dialogue around grief in the workplace and how leaders can really support their employees during those difficult times. We'll see you back after these short messages.
Grief. Grief is a normal response to loss of any kind. There are many types of losses and many types of grief. There is no one way to grieve, and everyone grieves differently. Usually, it can be really tough for some time, like you are holding a big weight that you're just not strong enough to carry. Grief can be confusing. One minute you're in floods of tears, and the next you're laughing with friends. Sometimes it can feel like your grief is consuming you, or you are drowning in it, or like you've somehow fallen apart. Grief can make you sick in all sorts of ways. It can keep you awake for hours on end. It can be scary, but mostly it can feel very, very lonely. Sometimes you just want your grief to go away, and you long for your old life to come back again. Often people just don't understand saying things like, Well, you look great. You are so strong. You've got an angel in heaven now. And we can feel let down. In time, we learn that grief doesn't shrink or go away. We just learn to live with it. We slowly adapt to our loss and grow around our grief. The grief remains the same, but we change. Slowly, bubbles of life begin to come back. And we find new ways to continue a bond with our loved ones. Time alone doesn't change grief. It's what we do with our time that matters.
Now, back to workplace psychology with Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Work Psychology with Dr. Delos. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Lombard-Sims. And if you're just joining us, with us today we have Camelia Smith, CEO of Renewed Outlook. And we were just having a discussion during the break, Camelia, around, the workplace and the importance of how leaders can show up and their presence during times of grief. One of the things that we've unfortunately have all been privy to is the fact that Savannah Guthrie is going through a lot right now, looking for her mom. And we, of course, all pray for her mom's safe return. And we also witnessed how well her employer is handling that, giving her the time off she needs, allowing her to come back when she was ready to come back. But unfortunately, not every employee has that. I shared my own personal experience where my leader was like, well, I brought my laptop to the hospital. You should be working while you're there at the hospital. When we think about the workplace and we think about leaders in the workplace, again, we talked a lot about that flexibility and the need for flexibility. But when you're an employee dealing with this in the workplace, what are some advice you can give to that employee in terms of how they navigate going through their own crisis, their own personal situation and work?
It is a hard situation, and sometimes we don't think we're going to be in the situation, but the best thing is preparation. So we're talking about it, putting things in place, knowing what your resources are, because a lot of times companies do have resources like the EAP. And so with the EAP, Employment Assistance Program, we only think about it in reference, or I don't know if we only think about it, but in reference to counseling. But they have a lot of other resources that fall under the Employment Assistance Program. So knowing what those are, how many counseling hours do you get for free? How many days do you get off for bereavement? Knowing what short-term disability is, knowing what Family Medical Leave Act is, and what resources you would go to if that was to happen. So those things are things that we have to be our own best advocate for. A lot of times we want our leaders to be compassionate, we want our leaders to be it, but a lot of times I guess they think they've already done that work, and so we have to be kind of diligent. It would be great for leaders to be aware of those resources so that they can guide the person through. You might need to take short-term disability or look into that. That might be an option for you. There's also accommodations where you can have a half a work day. So in your situation, you might have worked the first 4 hours and then been off the last 4 hours, a part of that. And so you wouldn't have been able to get that call from your supervisor, because they would have known that you were going to be off because you had something. So taking those things is one way, but then also the leaders being aware of those things and offering them to their employees and to their staff, being their cheerleader, being there for them, having their back. You might not be thinking through this, but have you thought about this? These are all things that are available to you.
That's right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's so many more resources than the EAP. I think everybody defaults, oh, call the EAP, and then people think of it's counseling, and there's still that stigma about having to see a counselor, having to, get mental health support, when our mental health actually dictates our physical health. It's just as important, if not as more important, than our physical health. But we detract from that. So knowing all the things that are available to you through your employer, FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. I forget, we're talking in acronyms, Family Medical Leave Act, short-term disability, EAP, peers, resources in the community, your church, might have some resources. I think those are great things. I had a guest on my show recently who was a breast cancer survivor, and she was talking about the fact that she didn't even want people at work to know that she was going through this, and so nobody knew, but the person who did know was her daughter. And she wasn't sure what to do in terms of resources for her daughter. Now, I know that you do more of the individual counseling. Anything you want to say on that? Anything that we can offer someone who may be going through the process but have a spouse or a child that's going through it as well?
One of the things that as humans that we need to do is expression. So having safe places to be able to communicate, being able to feel open enough to cry is very important. So that's what counseling is. That's what therapy is, just that safe place for you to be able to let out your feelings. And sometimes it might be a girlfriend, or sometimes it might be, a family member that you're able to open up to. But being able to do that is very important. And then you're able to organize and be able to get to different things that you need to do. So being open and finding a safe place and someone being present is the biggest thing that can be helpful for grief in and out of the workplace.
Camelia, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about a very important topic in the workplace, and that is grief. Again, as leaders, we don't always know what to do with grief, and same with employees. But we certainly hope that this topic today resonated with all of you and was something that you can take away from, because grief is all around us. And knowing how to manage it both in our personal lives and in the workplace is so very important. So thank you again, Camelia, for joining us. And for those of you tuning in, we hope you tune in next time and watch the next episode. We are live on Mondays at 6:30 p.m. on Channel 17 and Channel 1091. Thank you again for joining Workplace Psychology with Dr. Delos.
Next up at 7 o'clock is Let's Talk 901 with Betty LaMarr. Betty talks about all things 901, including top doctors, business leaders, and people just like you doing what you do to uplift the city of Memphis. 7:30 p.m., the Medical Class 901 with Dr. Chi, renowned infectious diseases specialist in the Mid-South who specializes in geographic medicine. Dr. Chi focuses on infectious diseases affecting the population.